Welcome to World War II Digital Archive. Today's stories feature women who were in the Pacific War. All of the stories that you will hear today are in the perspectives of women who helped the Allied war effort in the Pacific War and World War II.
Our first story starts off in Australia. Lieutenant Colonel Vivian Bullwinkel was the sole survivor of the Bangka Island massacre in 1942. She was born December 18, 1951 in Kapunda, South Australia. There she trained as a nurse and a midwife. In 1941, Bullwinkel wanted to enlist in the RAAF, the Royal Australian Air Force, but she couldn't because she had flat feet. Instead, she joined the Australian Army Nursing Service and was assigned to the 13th AGH, the Australian General Hospital. She was assigned to go to Singapore with the 2nd 13th AGH and later was reunited with the 13th AGH in Johor Bahru. While in Johor Bahru, the Japanese troops invaded Malaya in December 1941 and continued southwards, gaining more victories until January 1942. That forced the 13th AGH to evacuate Singapore and board the SS Viner Brook. 2 days later, their ship was sunk by a Japanese aircraft. Bullwinkel and others aboard the ship had to swim ashore at Raji Beach. The following day, they were joined by 100 British soldiers. They all decided to surrender, so they went to search for someone to surrender to. Japanese soldiers came and killed the men. They then machine-gunned the nurses from behind. Bullwinkel was hit by a bullet, and she pretended to be dead until the Japanese left. She hid with a wounded British private for 12 days until they decided to surrender. They got taken into captivity where the private ended up dying. Bullwinkel was reunited with other survivors where she told them about the massacre. She retired from the Army in 1947 and became the Director of Nursing at Melbourne's Fairfield Hospital. She was devoted to the nursing profession and to honor those killed on Bangka. In the decades following, she won many awards and honors like Florence Nightingale Medal, an MBE, and the AM. She got married in 1977 and returned back to Bangka in 1992 to honor the lost lives. Vivian Bullwinkel died July 3, 2000. Vivian Bullwinkel's story is important because she is one of the 24 survivors from the Bangka massacre. She also helped teach nursing and to honor those lost lives.
The next story is about Elizabeth Choy, a remarkable woman who is considered a Singaporean war heroine. During her life, she was also a teacher and a politician. Unfortunately, she died in 2006. Hopefully, through the World War II Digital Archive, her story will live on. Elizabeth Choy was born in Yong Sui Moi in Kudat, Malaysia in 1910. While she was attending boarding school, she became an Anglican and adopted the name Elizabeth. Elizabeth went on to pursue higher education in Singapore. She married Choy Kun Heng, a bookkeeper, in 1941. They were settling down in their new lives when the Japanese invaded Malaysia. This prompted Choy to volunteer as a nurse in the Medical Auxiliary Service. Eventually, Singapore was also attacked and taken under Japanese rule. Then, having lost their jobs, Elizabeth Choy and their husband formed a canteen at the Miyako Hospital. They would run regular ambulance runs for internees, otherwise known as prisoners for Chiang Kai prison. During their deliveries, the Choys would supply the prisoners of war with parcels of clothing, medicine, and messages. They also delivered radio parts for hidden receivers. However, an opposing force sank 7 Japanese ships, and the Kempeitai, the Japanese military police, found out that the information that caused the sinking of the ships was from Chiang Kai prison. So, this led to the Double 10th Massacre, in which 15 internees died from torture and interrogation. These interrogations also led to the Kempeitai discovering that the Choys were involved in the transmissions from the prison. So, Kun Heng was arrested, and then 16 days afterwards, Elizabeth met the same fate. For the next 193 days, she was to endure harsh, intense mental and physical torture. In her cell, she was the only female. There were 20 other men with her in that dirty and disgusting cell. She was slapped, kicked, and shocked. The electric shocks would cause her to be unable to touch any light switches for the rest of her life. This would be a defining moment in her life. Through all of the terrible and inhumane torture, Elizabeth never broke. She never revealed any information. This resilience would allow her freedom 193 days after capture. However, her husband was sentenced 12 more years. She would never see her husband again until the end of World War II. After the war, the Choys were invited to England. Elizabeth Choy would go on to meet Queen Elizabeth, who was the young Princess Elizabeth at the time. She would also receive many awards and be given the title of OBE, which was the Order of the British Empire. Then she returned to Singapore and resumed teaching. She also joined politics in the Legislative Council of Singapore. Eventually she retired but continued her social work. Then in 2006, she died at the age of 95. Elizabeth Choy's story represents the strength of women all around the world. Women who fought for freedom for as long as they could. Elizabeth fought to do the right thing all her life, even enduring pain and suffering so that others wouldn't have to. She also shows how we need to forgive and move on, which is demonstrated when she forgave the people who tortured her, instead of sending them to execution. Elizabeth Choy was a remarkable figure who should always be remembered and respected. Even at the lowest points in her life, she stayed strong and lived long enough to tell the tale. Elizabeth Choy's story will always be on World War II Digital Archive. To learn more about her story, use the link in the description.
Kathigasu, a courageous woman who was captured and tortured by the Japanese. She was also a trained midwife and nurse. In her lifetime, she was able to help people and ended up being the only woman to be awarded the George Medal. Sybil Kathigasu was born in 1899 in Medan, Indonesia. She grew up in British Malaysia, where there were a lot of Chinese expatriates living, so she was fluent in Cantonese. She was a trained midwife and nurse. Then she married Dr. Abdin Kathigasu and eventually had 2 daughters and adopted a son. Sybil and her husband operated a clinic in Ipoh, Malaya, from 1926 until the day before the Japanese troops arrived on December 26, 1942. They hid in the nearby town of Papan. In their hiding place, they kept a shortwave radio to listen to BBC broadcasts. They also secretly provided medical assistance to the guerrillas. Then, Dr. Kathigasu was arrested in July of 1943, and Sybil was arrested just a month later. Both were thrown in prison, and both were tortured. But no matter what they did, she wouldn't say anything about the resistance. He received 15 years in prison, and she received a life sentence. They were freed in August of 1945 by communist forces. Sybil was flown to the UK for medical treatment. While in Britain, she was awarded the George Medal at Buckingham Palace by King George VI for her bravery during the Japanese occupation. Sadly, she passed away because of her injuries only 6 months later. This story shows that Sybil still did what she thought was right, even though people around her were telling her that it was wrong and they even hurt her. It must have been hard to not say anything when she was being tortured. I probably would have said something just to make them stop. She was also the only Malayan woman to receive the George Medal, which is very impressive.
Our final story is about an American woman named Dickey Chapelle. She was a famous reporter who was known to put herself in danger to take pictures and would photograph many intense battles. Dickey Chapelle was born in Wisconsin and was taught in Shorewood High School. In high school, Dickey attended an MIT aeronautical design class when she was only 16. Dickey began her work in an airfield and learned how to fly. But after Dickey's mother found out that she was having an affair with a pilot, she was forced to live with her grandparents. Dickey then began to write for an air show and was noticed by the TWA. After receiving photography training and marrying Tony Chapelle, she then quit her job and divorced 15 years later. Dickey reported on nearly 50 conflicts during World War II, being there in person for all of them. She was posted with the Marines for most of her career and even got to see the Battle of Iwo Jima. Towards the end of her career, she was even able to do a parachute jump with the Screaming Eagles, saying that it was one of the greatest experiences one could have. Dickey was the first American female reporter to be killed in action in 1965. Dickey was a courageous woman who risked and eventually gave her life for her job. Considering that she could have written a report from the perspective of the soldiers, you can tell that she really cared about her reports.
This episode's theme was women who were involved with the war in the Pacific. Having these stories on the World War II Digital Archive will honor and preserve the experiences of these women. These stories will help people today who are interested in World War II or are just wanting to learn more. They will also help future generations understand and sympathize with these people. With this understanding, they can further their knowledge on the subject of World War II and use it to form connections. To learn more about World War II or any of these stories, please refer to the description. Make sure to like and subscribe to stay updated on our videos. Our next and final video will feature the genocides and aftermath of the war, so stay tuned if you are interested. Thank you.